Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the dark hush of a medieval night. You can almost feel the weight of the air, heavy with wood smoke and a faint tang of horse manure drifting from narrow streets. You wander under a moon that seems just a little too pale, the stars scattered above you like cold pinpricks on velvet. The town is asleep, or at least trying to be. Doors are bolted, shutters drawn tight, and you get the sense that even the dogs are trying to keep quiet. It's one of those nights where silence is louder than sound. And, as you stand here, you probably won't survive this story. But that's fine, because tonight isn't about winning. It's about drifting back into a time when surviving a week was already something worth bragging about. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment below with your location and what time it is where you're watching. It's always fun to see the patchwork of the world stitched together in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in a Europe that hasn't yet heard the word plague shouted on every street. People still grumble about taxes, gossip about neighbors, and pray for good harvests. The Black Death is not here yet, not in this town. And that's what makes this moment so eerie. It's like standing on a beach and noticing the tide has pulled too far back. Something is coming. You can feel it. The night smells of wax from candles guttering inside small chapels. If you tilt your head, you hear faint chants, monks reading psalms in low voices, their Latin carrying like waves through stone. It feels safe on the surface, but under it, there's unease. Stories have been floating along trade roads, strange deaths in the east, entire caravans silent by the time they reached port. And like any rumor, the details shift each time you hear them. Some say God is punishing the sinful, others mutter that a dragon has been loosed upon the world. Scholars still argue whether the first whispers came from Asia, from Crimea, or somewhere else entirely. You wander past an inn, its door cracked open just enough for laughter to spill out. A drunk man insists he heard that merchants in Venice are shutting the gates, and everyone else scoffs because nothing that dramatic could possibly happen. That's the thing about history. You already know how it ends, but these people don't. They laugh while you know the joke is coming for them. The houses lean over you, timber creaking. You pass a woman shaking out laundry, and you wonder how long she'll keep that routine. Ordinary life clings stubbornly before disaster. That's always been the way. And it makes you notice, these folks have no idea they're living on the cliff edge. They argue about sheep prices, about who stole whose chicken. None of them can imagine a sickness so fast and so merciless that entire streets will stand empty. You keep walking, and your feet crunch on straw scattered over mud to keep the smell down. Rats scurry ahead of you. You'd ignore them, but you can't stop staring. They're just rats tonight, furry, twitching little scavengers. But you already know, deep down, they're carrying history on their backs. There's a quirk here. Did you know some towns actually welcomed rats because they kept scraps from piling up too high? In a way, people unintentionally bred their own downfall. It's funny in that dark cosmic way how the smallest things rewrite the largest stories. You hear a church bell toll in the distance. One ring, then silence. Bells usually mean someone's died, but tonight it's just routine, the evening prayer hour. And yet, knowing what's coming, you can't unhear it as a warning. The night deepens and the streets empty. You wandered to the edge of the town wall where guards pace slowly. They look bored, leaning on spears, gossiping about nothing in particular. That's another callback to the innocence of this moment. The watchmen stand ready for raiders or thieves, not for an enemy that slides in unseen, carried by fleas small enough to hide in a tunic seam. You close your eyes for a moment, standing there in the chill air, and you imagine what it feels like not to know. To be one of these townsfolk wrapped in routine, thinking tomorrow will be much like today. They'll go to market, knead bread, scold children. No one suspects that in less than a season, funerals will outnumber weddings by 100 to 1. This is your first step into the Black Death's world. A world perched between ordinary and apocalyptic. And you're standing here, soaking in the last breaths of normalcy. Take a deep one, because the air is about to turn heavier, sharper, filled with fear you can almost taste. You linger by the town wall, and when dawn creeps over the horizon, the sky looks bruised, streaked with purples and oranges that don't feel gentle so much as ominous. You hear the gulls first, shrill, hungry cries overhead, and then you see the sails. Small, dark triangles at first, swelling larger as the ships push toward the harbor. You watch the townsfolk stir awake, curiosity pulling them toward the docks. Ships mean trade, and trade means spice, cloth, gossip, and maybe even something exotic like oranges from far-off lands. But this morning, the air feels wrong. The water slaps against wood with a heavy rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The ships are merchant vessels, creaking with the weight of goods. But if you look closely, you notice shadows darting along the ropes, rats already spilling from the hulls, quick and eager to claim a new home. You wander closer, blending with the crowd. Children tug at their mothers' sleeves, begging for a glimpse of sailors unloading crates. Men argue about prices before the cargo is even weighed. You can smell pitch, salt, sweat, and something else. Something faint, a sour tang that you can't quite name. It's easy to forget in this moment that the ocean wasn't just a lifeline. It was also the bloodstream of the medieval world. Whatever pulsed along its currents, silks, spices, ideas, so too did invisible passengers. Scholars still argue whether the plague first clung to ships in the Black Sea, or whether it had been simmering quietly along caravan trails long before that. What you do know, as you stand here, is that the harbor is like an open wound, and what drifts in will seep into every alley and hearth. You drift closer to a cart being unloaded. Bolts of fabric spill out, dyed deep crimson. One man coughs, just once, rough and wet, and no one thinks anything of it. People cough all the time. But you, standing there centuries later in spirit, you know this is a drumbeat starting. A cough here, a fever there, patterns that only make sense when you zoom out far enough. Sailors stagger down the gangplanks, their faces pale beneath salt-tangled beards. They look like they haven't slept in weeks, eyes glassy, lips cracked. One clutches his stomach as he steps onto solid ground. His captain waves him off as lazy, but you feel the truth. Something's hollowing him from the inside. A quirky detail slips through here. You notice some sailors actually tossing sacks of herbs onto the dock, believing they'll keep bad air away. Imagine that, carefully unloading bundles of rosemary and lavender as if perfume can stop death. And yet, centuries later, we'll call this practice fumigation with a straight face. History is a loop like that. Crowds press tighter as goods are hauled off. Chickens squawk in cages. A goat kicks against its tether. Barrels thud onto cobblestones. Rats scurry again, darting into alleys, slipping through holes. Nobody chases them. They're as common as dirt. The irony, of course, is that these little stowaways carry fleas that carry something far more precious than spices, Yersinia pestis, though no one here has a name for it. You shift with the people, hearing mutters of excitement about silk prices, wool shortages, and whether the king's taxes will take half the profit anyway. The entire scene is bustling, almost joyful in its routine. And that's what's so unsettling, because you already know this market chatter is the overture before the scream. One sailor collapses suddenly on the dock. Gasps ripple through the crowd. His mates rush to lift him, laughing nervously, insisting he's just seasick. They drag him into the inn, promising he'll be fine after a nap. But you know better. You know that within days, not only will he not be fine, but everyone who shares that room may find themselves coughing too. The bells ring again from the church tower, this time to announce morning prayers. People cross themselves, bowing heads briefly, then get right back to haggling. Business before devotion, always. But you can't unhear those bells as a warning. They clang across the harbor like the tolling of some cosmic clock, measuring how little time this town has left before its innocence cracks open. You wander away from the dock, but you keep glancing back at the ships. More keep appearing on the horizon, sails white and swollen. Each one carries not just goods, but the silent echo of what's coming. And no matter how far inland you go, the tide of infection will find you. That's the thing about networks. They don't just spread ideas, they spread consequences. Tonight, you'll fall asleep remembering the way those ships looked cutting across the water like dark teeth. Because one day soon, when the coughing starts in earnest, when the rats grow bolder, you'll realize that this morning was the hinge. Life before, life after. And you just watched the hinge swing open. You leave the harbor behind, but the sound of gulls and creaking masts follows you like an echo that refuses to fade. As you drift through the narrow streets, the town feels restless. There's chatter at every corner, mutters passing like sparks down a dry rope. You catch a phrase here, a word there, strange fevers, sailors coughing, God's punishment. People speak low, like they're afraid of being overheard by the sickness itself. You pause in a marketplace where the air is thick with the smell of fish, onions, and dung. A woman selling garlic mutters to a customer about a family who took ill overnight. Her voice drops even lower, and you lean closer. The swellings, she whispers, under the arms, black as ink. The man buying garlic shakes his head, muttering that it's just gossip, that folks always look for doom in ordinary sickness. But you know this isn't ordinary. It's the creeping sickness making its first appearance, slipping between doorways like a thief. The first symptoms always sound small: a cough, a fever, a bit of fatigue. Who doesn't feel weak after a hard day's work in the fields? But then come the lumps, the buboes, angry swellings in the armpits, the groin, the neck. They rise like hard knots under the skin, tender, throbbing, and darkening to shades no body part should ever turn. The sight of them is enough to make stomachs drop. You hear people whisper, "It's the Black Blaine." Old names from old plagues resurface, dragged out like unlucky talismans. You wander further, through streets where children play tag, shrieking with laughter, their voices slicing through the tension. It's strange. Life continues, but you can feel the thread fraying. Parents call their children back sooner than usual, casting wary eyes at the sailors coughing by the tavern. Fear is subtle at first, like a shadow at the edge of vision. But once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. There's a scholarly debate here worth noting. Some historians argue the plague hit suddenly like lightning, while others suggest it simmered for weeks, building slowly until panic broke loose. Scholars still argue whether the earliest cases were dismissed as ordinary fevers, lost in the noise of medieval life. To you, wandering these streets, it feels like a slow drip becoming a flood. You hear one rumor, then another, and before long every sneeze sounds like a death knell. You duck into a tavern where the air is warm, heavy with the smell of ale and roasted meat. Sailors hunch at tables, drinking deeply, trying to drown fatigue in cheap wine. One of them wipes sweat from his brow, his hand trembling. The man beside him scoffs, teasing, "Too much drink?" But the way the sick man slumps against the wall says otherwise. You notice a rat dart under a bench, its fur bristling, its tiny body carrying more weight in history than any knight in armor ever did. Nobody notices, nobody cares. It's just a rat. And here's a quirky detail for you. Some people believed that strong smells could actually drive the sickness away. You see a barmaid burning rosemary in a corner, waving the smoke with a scrap of cloth as though she's shooing invisible spirits. Customers wrinkle their noses but say nothing. Better to smell herbs than to catch whatever's making that sailor sweat bullets. When you step back into the street, the mood feels heavier. A boy runs past, shouting, "Another man's fallen at the docks!" His voice cracks with the thrill of gossip, but you catch the edge of fear behind it. People start to gather in small knots, talking faster, hands gesturing wide. Some say the sickness is punishment for greed. Others insist it comes from foreign lands carried on foul winds. One old man rasps that the stars themselves are misaligned. Theories multiply faster than the disease. You wander further to a small church, its door open to anyone seeking comfort. Inside, the candles flicker and smoke curls upward, staining the ceiling with soot. A priest kneels before the altar, whispering prayers under his breath. He looks exhausted, but when a family enters with a coughing child, he forces a smile and sprinkles holy water. The mother clutches her son tightly, whispering that God will spare him. You know better. The prayers feel fragile against what's coming. A bell rings again outside, and you step into the daylight to find a cart rolling by. On it lies a man covered with a rough cloth, only his hand visible, fingers curled stiffly. People step aside quickly, covering mouths with sleeves. You hear one woman mutter, "It spreads by breath, mark my words." Another shakes her head, swearing it comes from poisoned wells. Nobody agrees, but everyone fears. As night falls again, the town seems different than it did just one day earlier. Doors slam earlier, shutters rattle shut, and the streets grow quiet too soon. You stand in the silence and hear faint coughing in the distance, echoing between the houses. It's not many, not yet, but it's enough. You realize the creeping sickness has entered the town, slipping into lungs, into skin, into whispers. And now it's only a matter of time before the trickle becomes a flood. Take one last breath of the cool night air. Tomorrow, it will taste of smoke, sweat, and fear. You step into the streets as panic begins to ripple through the town like a nervous current. It's subtle at first. Faces a little paler than yesterday, eyes darting at shadows, voices dropping to whispers. You wander past the marketplace where merchants hurriedly close stalls, muttering about spoiled goods and disappearing customers. Fear, you notice, has a sound. The clatter of shutters, the slam of doors, the hurried steps of those unwilling to linger. Children, once carefree, clutch their mother's skirts tightly, glancing at every passerby as though danger lurks behind every face. You watch as a baker scowls at a neighbor who coughs too loudly, suspicion and worry mingling in his gaze. People begin to murmur about the sickness that moves faster than the wind. It's not named yet, but everyone knows it's coming. You can feel it in the way conversations fracture mid-sentence, in the way people glance over their shoulders. You wander into an alley and notice a group of men standing stiffly, pointing toward a window above the street. Through the glass, a family huddles together, the mother clutching a child and shaking as the father slumps in a chair, sweating and groaning. You feel the pang of helplessness because there's nothing to do, nothing anyone can do. Scholars still argue whether quarantine measures were ever effective, or if they merely delayed the inevitable. You can see both sides in this one window, fear and futility coexisting in a fragile bubble. The streets smell sharper now. Smoke from hearth fires mixes with the tang of human sweat and the sourness of abandoned food. You pass a group of women dragging a wheelbarrow filled with herbs, candles, and scraps of iron. They mumble protective charms under their breath, waving the smoke over doorways and door handles. It feels both charming and absurd, this medieval attempt to outwit death with scent and superstition. And then you notice it. The carts. The first of them lumber past, wooden wheels groaning over cobblestones, carrying bodies wrapped in rough cloth. The sight is so mundane, yet horrifying, like a daily routine you can't unsee. You notice how townsfolk step aside, faces pale, hands pressed to mouths. Others avert their gaze entirely, pretending the cart isn't there. Others stare, frozen, whispering prayers under their breath. You realize quickly that death has become a performance, a spectacle of its own making. Curiously, you spot an old man standing alone, counting each cart as it passes. He murmurs softly, almost conversationally, 100 today. No, 102. You wonder if he's keeping track out of fear, superstition, or a grim fascination. Oddly, you find yourself following him for a few steps, and you notice the rhythm of his counting. It gives shape to the chaos, like a heartbeat amidst the panic. The panic seeps into daily life. Shops shutter earlier, markets empty faster, and even the town criers speak in hushed tones. Conversations shift toward blame. Foreigners, merchants, sinners, or divine punishment. You overhear a man say, "It's the Jews, they've poisoned the wells," and you flinch at the casual cruelty of ignorance. Others insist it's God's will, a test of faith. Fear twists morality, you realize, shaping not only actions, but the very stories people tell themselves to survive mentally. You wander past another cart, this one heavier, its wheels splintered under weight. A woman shrieks as it passes, pointing at the body inside. A young man, perhaps no older than you, eyes closed, lips purple. His mother follows behind, trembling, supported by neighbors. You feel a shiver run down your spine. Death is no longer abstract. It's tactile, immediate, unavoidable. Amid the chaos, a few people act as if nothing has changed. A group of children play near a fountain, tossing pebbles into the water, laughing despite everything. Their resilience is striking, and you can't help but admire it, even if it feels incongruous. Life presses on stubbornly, almost defiantly, like green shoots pushing through cracked stone. By evening, the town seems unrecognizable. Smoke rises in spirals from chimneys, mingling with the mist from the harbor. Carts roll by at regular intervals, each one a silent reminder of mortality. You wander into a square where the market once bustled, now empty except for a few cautious townsfolk and a cat weaving between barrels. You notice how quickly absence reshapes perception. Empty stalls seem heavier, streets narrower, silence deeper. The first screams arrive with the night. You hear them in the distance, sharp, fragmented, almost swallowed by the darkness. It's a new sound, different from ordinary grief or surprise, primal, fearful, contagious. You feel the fear almost physically, a wave that pushes against your chest as you move past shuttered windows and barricaded doors. Panic is no longer whispered, it's lived. And as you wander, you realize something strange. Despite the terror, life continues. Candle flames flicker, cats hunt for scraps, rats scurry unnoticed. You see a mother feeding a child by candlelight, a baker tossing dough in a quiet kitchen, the old man still counting carts. Scholars still argue whether the human capacity for adaptation during the plague was born of fear, necessity, or sheer stubbornness.
You lean against a wall, watching the dance of chaos and order unfold simultaneously. You take a deep breath, letting the night settle around you, but your thoughts remain tethered to the alleys and carts, the whispering townsfolk, the unseen carriers of disease. The creeping sickness has left the shadows, spilling into every street and hearth. And as you stand there, you understand that panic isn't just a feeling, it's the first stage of survival.
You round a corner and suddenly encounter figures that make your skin crawl. Doctors in their iconic bird masks. Their presence is jarring, almost theatrical, like something out of a nightmare staged for your benefit. You watch as they move methodically through streets, black robes brushing the cobblestones, wooden canes tapping rhythmically. The masks, stuffed with herbs and flowers, emit a faint, sweet aroma, meant to counteract the miasma or foul air thought to carry disease. You notice the contrast between their calm, purposeful movements and the chaos around them, and it's almost comical, death personified, yet oddly ceremonial. You wander closer, careful to stay out of their way. Some locals step aside with reverence, others with fear. Scholars still argue whether these early physicians actually helped prevent infection or if their elaborate attire merely served as psychological comfort for the living. To you, it's both. A strange mix of earnest care and dramatic performance, a theater of survival. The quirkiness of it strikes you. The mask's beak is stuffed with everything from rose petals to camphor, clove, and dried mint. People believed the herbs purified the air, a protective shield against the plague. Imagine walking down a street where the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and herbs, and these tall, strange figures glide past like oversized crows. Their appearance feels absurd, almost whimsical, yet it's terrifying. Life during the plague often balanced on this thin edge between the rational and the surreal. You notice one doctor examining a patient through the window of a shuttered house. The patient, a man doubled over in agony, has dark swellings under his arms. The doctor peers intently, tapping the buboes with his gloved hand, murmuring something incomprehensible. To the townsfolk watching, it looks like magic or witchcraft. To you, it's the precursor of medicine, meticulous, fearful, and improvisational. As you follow them down the street, you overhear snippets of their conversations. "Keep the herbs near the nose," one says. Another mutters, "Bloodletting tonight, if necessary." You shiver, thinking about the odd combination of ritual and empirical observation. Some patients were lucky to survive. Others, well, history has no patience for fairness. You realize these men were performing both a psychological service and a medical one, their presence meant to instill hope where very little existed. The streets feel emptier as night falls. You notice rats watching from shadowed corners, unbothered by the doctors, unaffected by the rituals. Fleas carry their deadly cargo regardless of human effort. And you can't help but marvel at the small absurdity of it all, the human desire to impose order, to fight with incense and robes while the invisible enemy dances across every threshold. A quirky detail emerges. Some doctors wore their beaks so long that they could barely see their feet. Walking down cobbled streets, they had to lift robes carefully to avoid tripping. You imagine one tripping, nearly toppling over a barrel, the townsfolk watching with stifled giggles, even amid terror. It's a reminder that history, even at its darkest, carries flashes of humanity and humor. You wander to a small square where a doctor tends to a group of patients lying on mats outside a shuttered inn. Their moans mingle with the distant cries of merchants and children. Candles flicker, casting elongated shadows of the masked figures on stone walls. You notice how the masks give the doctors a dual identity: human caretakers and symbolic crows of death. The townsfolk seem comforted somehow by the presence of these bizarre figures. Scholars still argue whether the masks provided any real protection or if their effectiveness was purely psychological. The air smells strongly of herbs, mingling with the ever-present stench of disease. You take a cautious step back, observing the ritualized movements: tapping, touching, murmuring, writing notes on parchment. It feels like watching a play where every gesture has meaning, yet the audience knows the story's tragic ending. You see hope, absurdity, and mortality intertwined in every careful step, every puff of scented air. Night deepens, and you continue wandering. You notice the contrast between the calm vigilance of the doctors and the frantic townsfolk scurrying to avoid exposure. The clash of calm and panic, order and chaos, plays out like a strange ballet. One moment a child runs past laughing, the next a cart rolls slowly by carrying yet another victim. You realize the plague transformed not only bodies, but rhythms of life itself. The street narrows ahead, and you glimpse a small courtyard where a doctor bends over a patient, the beak almost touching the sick man's face. You notice the patient's eyes flutter, fear and confusion mingling with the faint scent of lavender. It's a moment of intimate absurdity, a battle against the invisible enemy conducted with petals, herbs, and a long wooden cane. You step back into the night air, letting the quiet streets swallow you. The town feels different now. The doctor's presence has cast a spell of both terror and reassurance. You realize that even amid panic, humans cling to rituals, to symbols, to anything that might help them survive. You watch as the doctors disappear down a side alley, their robes whispering against the stone, leaving behind an air of eerie calm. And as you wander on, you notice that the plague doesn't care for ceremony, for masks, for prayers. It moves silently, hitching rides on rats and fleas, slipping between windows and threading itself into life itself. Yet you also notice the resilience of people, their fear, yes, but also their ingenuity, their strange, theatrical attempts to wrest control from a chaos they can't see. The night air carries a chill, and you shiver, stepping over stray rats and discarded herbs. You pause for a moment, listening to distant bells and the coughs echoing faintly from shuttered houses. It's the beginning of a new rhythm, one dictated by fear, ritual, and the creeping knowledge that life is no longer the same. And somehow, even in this fear, you can't help but admire the human spirit, its stubborn insistence to act, to care, to try. The next morning, you wake to the sound of hammering. At first, you think it's just a craftsman repairing his shutters, but as you wander through the streets, you realize the hammer strikes are sealing something else: doors. Families who've shown signs of sickness are being boarded inside their own homes. The sound of nails biting into wood carries down the narrow alleyways like a grim new song of the city. You pause at one house where a woman shouts from an upper window, begging for mercy. Her face is pale, streaked with tears. Two men below, wearing scarves across their mouths, keep hammering. Orders, one mutters, not meeting her eyes. She reaches out a hand, clutching a rosary, but the shutters slam closed and the hammer falls again. You step back, realizing the creeping sickness isn't just taking lives, it's reshaping the very way neighbors treat one another. You wander further and see candles burning outside certain doorways, set there by families to signal both devotion and desperation. Some houses display sprigs of herbs nailed to doors as talismans. Others are eerily silent, shutters tight, no sound at all except the occasional cough leaking through the cracks. The city feels like a patchwork of life and death, stitched side by side. One quirky detail you notice, in some alleys people have begun drawing chalk symbols on the walls, half prayers, half graffiti, a crude cross here, a star there, strange signs scratched hastily into stone. Children, too young to understand, trace them with fingers, giggling as if it's just another game. You realize these markings aren't just superstition, they're a kind of communal communication, a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos. Scholars still argue whether such quarantines helped slow the spread or whether they simply condemned entire households. You, standing in the middle of it, feel the heavy contradiction. The hammering is meant to save, but it sounds like execution. The air is thick with helplessness. People whisper to each other as they pass, skirts brushing against the walls, eyes darting nervously. You catch fragments. They sealed the baker's family yesterday. The tailor's boy didn't last a week. Every story grows more dramatic, every detail darker. You wander past the marketplace and find it eerily transformed. Where once the air buzzed with shouts of merchants, now only a handful of stalls remain, guarded by men with sticks who shout at customers to keep their distance. You notice how people trade with outstretched arms, coins dropped carefully into bowls, goods handed across with cloths. The marketplace, once the heart of community life, now feels like a place of suspicion. Even food carries danger. A cart rattles by, pulled by a weary mule. On it lies a heap of bodies, covered with cloths that do little to hide the shapes beneath. A child stares wide-eyed from a doorway until his mother pulls him inside, slamming the door. You feel the weight of silence pressing on the street as the cart disappears, wheels crunching over cobblestones. You realize the creeping sickness has given rise to new rhythms of sound, the hammering of boards, the ringing of bells, the slow, heavy roll of carts. Night falls, and you wander toward the outskirts of town. You notice fires burning in small pits, people tossing herbs and spices into the flames, letting smoke billow upward. The smell of sage, lavender, and vinegar stings your nose. People believe the smoke can purify the air, drive away the invisible poison. You watch as they wave the smoke toward their faces, covering mouths and noses, as though the haze itself were a shield. It's half ritual, half science, and fully human. And here's another odd detail. Some people carry small pouches of crushed emeralds or ground pearls, believing precious stones could ward off the sickness. You spot a merchant showing off a tiny vial of ruby powder, claiming it's stronger than death itself. His customers nod nervously, handing him coins they can scarcely afford. You can't help but feel the irony, buying jewels to fight fleas. As you drift back toward the town center, you hear music. It startles you because music feels out of place here. But sure enough, a small group of young men dance in a square, clapping and stomping to the rhythm of a fiddle. Their movements are frantic, almost desperate, as if they can dance the fear away. People gather to watch, some joining, others shaking their heads. It's absurd, but it's also beautiful. Joy and terror colliding in the same breath. You linger watching the dance until the fiddler suddenly coughs, doubling over. The music falters, the crowd scatters, and silence crashes back like a wave. The square empties quickly, leaving only the echo of footsteps and a single candle guttering in the dark. You realize the creeping sickness has a cruel sense of timing, snuffing out moments of light the instant they spark. Walking homeward, you notice how the town has grown darker in more ways than one. Torches burn lower, fewer windows glow. People no longer linger at thresholds to chat.
Conversations are quick, cautious, spoken with one hand already on the door handle. You feel the weight of isolation closing in, as if every household is becoming its own island. Before you sleep, you pause by a shuttered inn. Inside, faint voices sing a hymn, thin and wavering, but steady. The sound drifts through the cracks in the wood, fragile yet defiant. You close your eyes, letting the notes wash over you. For a moment it feels like the sickness hasn't stolen everything. There is still song, still faith, still the stubborn heartbeat of human community, even if it's muffled by boards and nails. The night air is cool, carrying hints of smoke and rosemary. You take a deep breath, knowing tomorrow the hammering will start again. The morning sun feels weak, as if even the sky is exhausted by the creeping sickness. You walk through the town and notice how superstition grows thicker with each passing day, spreading almost as fast as the disease itself. People search desperately for explanations, for patterns, for someone or something to blame. And you watch as fear takes strange shapes. You come across a woman scattering handfuls of crushed herbs onto her doorstep, muttering prayers with each toss. Her neighbor, however, is convinced onions are the cure. He hangs them from every window, fat bulbs swinging like grim ornaments. The smell clings to the air, sharp and pungent, mixing unpleasantly with the smoke from nearby fires. Scholars still argue whether these rituals offered any protection, or simply hopeful gestures. To you, wandering through the pungent streets, it feels like walking through an apothecary where every recipe is half prayer, half experiment. There's a quirky detail you can't help but notice. Some families carry pomanders, small ornate balls filled with spices, herbs, or even vinegar-soaked sponges. People hold them close to their noses as if sniffing salvation itself. You pass a wealthy man who proudly displays his silver pomander, polished to gleaming, while a beggar beside him clutches only a rag soaked in vinegar. Both inhale deeply, both look equally afraid. The plague, you realize, is the great equalizer. It ignores silver, gold, and rags alike. Further down the street, you see a group gathered around a traveling preacher. He shouts about sin, waving a tattered Bible, claiming the plague is God's punishment for pride and greed. His words whip the crowd into a frenzy. People cry out, some beating their chests, others collapsing to their knees. One man even strips off his shirt, begging forgiveness aloud. You feel the air thicken with guilt and desperation, each syllable of the sermon fanning the flames of panic. Yet not everyone agrees. A scholar in a long robe steps forward, shaking his head. It is not sin, he argues, but poison in the air. Look at the stars. The conjunctions are wrong. The preacher shouts him down, calling him a heretic. The crowd splits, some shouting repent, while others mutter about astronomy and foul winds. Scholars still argue whether astrology or theology held more sway, but in this moment, it's clear. People will cling to any explanation that offers even the faintest control. You wander away from the shouting and stumble upon a quieter superstition. In a narrow alley, children draw circles on the ground, filling them with flowers and singing songs. They laugh, skipping in circles, their voices sweet but eerie. It takes you a moment to realize the songs are about the sickness itself, nursery rhymes born from fear, wrapped in play. It's unsettling how easily children turn catastrophe into games. Later, you notice another odd practice. Families hang mirrors outside their doors, angled to reflect the street. Some believe mirrors can bounce away evil spirits, sending the sickness back to where it came from. Others smear tar across their thresholds, convinced the sticky, foul-smelling substance will trap the plague in its tracks. To walk through these streets is to pass through a museum of human imagination, each doorway a new exhibit in the art of desperation. The night brings even stranger sights. A procession of flagellants marches into town, men stripped to the waist,
backs raw and bleeding from whips. They chant as they walk, lashes cracking against flesh, convinced that punishing themselves will cleanse the sins of the world. The sound is horrible, yet mesmerizing. The steady rhythm of leather on skin, the moans of pain, the fervent voices rising into the starry sky. Townsfolk watch in silence, some joining, some hiding their faces. You feel torn between revulsion and awe. Scholars still argue about the flagellants, whether they spread the sickness further by gathering crowds, or whether they gave people a sense of hope. To you, their presence feels like a fever dream, blood, prayer, and song woven together in the torchlit dark. You can't help but wonder if the plague feeds not only on bodies, but on fear itself. There's a final quirky detail you can't shake. Some households keep live pigeons in cages, believing the birds can draw out the disease. You watch a man press a pigeon against his swollen bubo, eyes closed in desperate faith. The bird flutters wildly, cooing in distress, until he pulls it away. He stares at the poor creature, waiting for a miracle that doesn't come. As you drift back into the heart of town, you realize superstition is more than just fear. It's survival. These rituals, however strange, give people something to do, something to believe, some small scrap of control. You pass a doorway with garlic, another with mirrors, another with tar, and you realize each is a story, a hope, a fragile shield against the creeping sickness. The air grows colder as night deepens. Fires burn low, their smoke mingling with incense and herbs. You take one last look at the flickering windows, each household clinging to its chosen ritual. Some will survive, some won't, but all believe. And belief, in times like these, is as essential as bread. You walk on, the sound of flagellant chants still echoing faintly behind you, the smell of onions thick in your nose, and you can't help but wonder, which is stronger, the plague itself or the human imagination fighting it? You wake to the sound of bells, but not the cheerful peals that once marked feast days or weddings. These are slower, heavier, tolling out over the rooftops like a heartbeat too weak to keep time. You follow the sound until you find yourself standing in a wide square where a crowd is gathered. At the center, a priest in white robes sprinkles holy water on a coffin. Around him, the mourners stand apart, faces drawn tight, voices low. It's your first proper funeral during the creeping sickness, and it feels different. Stripped of joy, reduced to bare ritual. You notice how quickly it moves. No grand processions, no elaborate feasts. The body is lowered, prayers muttered, and then the earth swallows the coffin. People cross themselves and step back, as though lingering too close might invite the sickness to follow them home. You wander to the edge of the square where two grave diggers lean on their shovels. One spits into the dirt and mutters that there are too many to keep up with. The other laughs bitterly, saying, "Soon they'll be stacking them instead of burying them." His words hang in the air like a curse. You realize the rhythm of life itself is shifting. Fewer births celebrated, more deaths buried under hasty prayers. As you continue walking, you notice something odd. The cemeteries are filling so fast that graves crowd against each other, barely separated. In some places, bodies are buried in shallow pits, covered with thin layers of soil. Dogs and birds circle overhead, and you shiver at the thought of what happens when the earth cannot hold its dead. Scholars still argue whether mass graves were a desperate necessity or a deliberate policy. But you, standing here, see only exhaustion. Too many dead, too few hands. There's a quirky detail here too. Some townsfolk believe that bells themselves can drive away disease. The idea is that the sound purifies the air, scattering the invisible poisons. You watch as the bell ropes swing, heavy iron tongues striking with grim persistence. The air vibrates with each strike, as though the town is trying to shake off the sickness with sheer noise. Later that day, you find yourself at another funeral. This one's smaller. A family stands weeping beside a body wrapped hastily in a sheet. The priest mutters prayers so quickly you can barely catch the words. The family is allowed only a few moments before they are hurried away. There's no time for lingering. No time for closure. Death moves too fast. What's strange is how normalized it becomes. As you wander the streets, you pass a procession of bodies, a cart filled with coffins, and nobody even pauses. A woman carrying a loaf of bread steps aside politely, waits for the cart to pass, and continues home as if it's just another inconvenience. Death becomes background noise, like the creak of wagons or the barking of dogs. At night, though, it feels different. You hear the muffled wails of families grieving behind shuttered doors. The town is quieter now, not because there's peace, but because people are too tired to make noise. The silence is punctured only by the roll of death carts and the occasional toll of bells. You realize that funerals aren't just about the dead anymore. They're for the living, a fragile structure to hold back the weight of despair. You pass a house where candles flicker in the window. Inside, you glimpse a family kneeling, praying over a body laid out on a table. They've chosen not to send their loved one away yet. Perhaps they hope prayers will change fate, or perhaps they just can't bear to let go. The air smells faintly of incense and sweat. You stand there for a moment, intruding silently before slipping back into the shadows. Another detail catches your attention: songs. Funerals during the plague often included hymns, but now the songs are shorter, sharper, almost whispered. You hear one group of mourners chanting Dies Irae, their voices trembling in the cold air. The words speak of judgment, of wrath, of final reckoning, and you feel a chill ripple through you. Scholars still argue whether these dirges gave comfort or deepened despair, but you sense both in every wavering note. The next morning, you wander toward the edge of town where a new burial ground has been hastily dug. The earth is raw, uneven, piles of soil heaped beside open trenches. You watch as a cart arrives, bodies bundled in linen dropped quickly into the ground. There's no priest here, no prayers, just the sound of shovels scraping and dirt thudding down. You realize funerals have begun to split into two kinds: one for the wealthy, with bells and incense, and one for everyone else, hurried, silent, forgotten. A quirky image lingers. You see a boy standing at the edge of a grave, holding a single flower. He waits until the grave diggers look away, then tosses it in. No words, no ceremony, just a child's gesture of stubborn humanity. For a moment, it feels like the most honest funeral of all. As the days blur together, you notice how funerals change the air of the town. They aren't rare events anymore. They're woven into the rhythm of daily life. People speak less of weddings and births, more of burials and losses. Children grow up learning the cadence of bells before they learn to read. You feel the town itself sagging under the weight of so much grief, yet somehow still moving forward, step by weary step. You return to your room that evening, the echo of bells still humming in your chest. Funerals have become the town's heartbeat. Slow, heavy, unrelenting. You close your eyes and realize that in a world unraveling, even grief has its rituals. And maybe, just maybe, those rituals are what keep people from falling apart entirely. The streets smell different now. It's not just smoke or sweat or the sharp tang of onions strung up on doorways. It's something heavier, something sour. As you walk, you begin to realize why. The markets are changing. Food is scarce, and what's left is tainted by fear. You step into the main square, where merchants once shouted cheerfully, hawking fresh bread and baskets of fruit. Now the shouts are quieter. tinged with suspicion. A woman selling fish refuses to touch coins directly, making customers drop them into a bucket of vinegar before she picks them up. A baker sets out loaves wrapped in cloth, then quickly retreats a few steps, arms folded, eyes darting nervously. The air hums with tension. Every cough in the crowd makes people flinch. The prices, too, have changed. A sack of grain costs more than some families earn in a week. A mother pleads with a merchant, offering a necklace in exchange for flour. The merchant hesitates, then takes the necklace with a shrug. Hunger doesn't bargain fairly. You wander past a stall where a man sells not food, but remedies. Bottles of colored liquid line his table, each one promising safety. This one is rosemary tonic, he boasts, keeps the plague at bay. Another bottle contains a murky mix of garlic and vinegar. People crowd around, desperate, handing over coins. You can't help but notice how the so-called medicines look suspiciously like flavored water. Quackery thrives where fear grows. Scholars still argue whether some of these folk remedies offered any small benefit, but here and now, it's obvious. Hope sells better than bread. A quirky detail catches your eye. In the corner of the square, a man has set up a stall selling live chickens. He tells buyers to sleep with the birds, to let them draw out the sickness. One woman nods eagerly, clutching a squawking hen to her chest. You can't decide whether to laugh or cry. The sight is absurd, yet it makes perfect sense to people drowning in dread. As you wander, you overhear whispers of food riots. Families can't afford the soaring prices, and tempers boil. You see the beginnings of one right before your eyes. A group of hungry men crowding a bread stall, shouting that the baker is hoarding grain. The baker shouts back, swearing he has nothing left to give. Then someone throws a stone. The crowd surges forward. You slip into an alley, heart pounding as the stall collapses under desperate hands. Later, the square is quiet again, but the broken bread stall lies in ruins, crumbs scattered across the cobblestones. A stray dog licks at the ground, tail wagging. Life, in small ways, goes on. But you realize that scarcity doesn't just weaken bodies. It frays the threads of trust. Neighbors stop helping neighbors. Every coin, every crumb becomes matter of survival. That evening, you find yourself in a tavern where the menu is shorter than it once was. No roasted meat tonight, only thin broth and stale bread. The tavern keeper shrugs when asked, saying supplies from the countryside have slowed to a trickle. Farmers are sick, roads are unsafe, and fear makes even healthy villages hoard their grain. You sip the broth, it tastes mostly of water, and realize hunger is the creeping sickness's silent partner. Scholars still argue whether famine made the plague worse, or whether the plague made famine worse. To you, it feels like a vicious knot, each tightening the other. The poorer you are, the hungrier you become. The hungrier you are, the weaker your body, the quicker the sickness finds you. The tavern air grows tense when a coughing man enters, asking for food. People shrink away, leaving space around him. The tavern keeper gives him a crust, but refuses to let him stay. He eats it in the doorway, crumbs falling into his beard, eyes hollow. Then he wanders back into the night. Nobody speaks. Everyone watches. You realize food isn't just nourishment anymore. It's a litmus test of who's welcome and who is feared. Another quirky moment strikes you as you step outside. A group of children sit on a doorstep, chewing on roasted chestnuts. They laugh, trading stories, even though their faces are thin and pale. One girl holds up a chestnut like it's a treasure. In a way, it is. Even in famine, children find joy in something as small as a warm nut. It feels almost defiant, like a tiny rebellion against despair. The night market is quieter than ever.
A few stalls still glow with candlelight, selling what little they have left. Some wilted vegetables, dried fish, a handful of eggs. The merchants' eyes are tired, their voices low. Every transaction feels heavier, as if both buyer and seller know they're gambling with survival. You head back to your lodging, the streets darker than before. The smell of smoke and onions lingers in the air, mixed now with the faint scent of hunger. Less bread baking, fewer roasts cooking. You realize the town itself feels thinner, worn down, not only by death, but by want. Before you sleep, you remember the riot, the broken bread stall, the pleading mother. The creeping sickness isn't just killing with fever and buboes. It's gnawing at the belly, at the bonds between people, at the fragile trust that holds a town together. And tomorrow, the markets will open again, with fewer stalls, higher prices, and the same cloud of fear hanging heavy. The silence in the night is different now. Once you might have heard laughter spilling out of taverns or the clang of a blacksmith finishing late, but now the air feels hushed, as though the town itself is holding its breath. You walk the narrow streets and notice something odd. Houses sealed shut, doors painted with crude symbols, windows barred from the inside. You come to realize these are quarantines. Families suspected of sickness have been locked in, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. Boards are nailed across doors, and a faint candlelight flickers behind shuttered windows. You can almost hear the whispers of people trapped inside, waiting, hoping the sickness will pass them over. On one door, someone has painted a red cross. On another, just the word, "Lord, have mercy." A sense of dread crawls into your stomach. You wonder if the residents inside still breathe, or if their silence is final. Some houses seem abandoned already, the smell of rot seeping from beneath the door, no one daring to check. You wander past a patrol of watchmen. They carry long staves, keeping their distance from one another. Their job is grim: enforce the isolation. A woman runs after them, pleading that her husband is not sick, that he only coughed because of the smoke from their fire. The watchmen don't listen. They shove her back, hammer more nails into her door, and leave. Her cries echo down the street long after they're gone. Quarantine is meant to save the city, but standing there, you can't help but notice how it feels more like a punishment. Entire families locked away, the healthy with the ill, left to fate behind wooden planks. Scholars still argue whether such quarantines slowed the spread of the plague, or whether they simply turned houses into silent tombs. As you walk further, you catch a quirky sight. Someone has tried to brighten their sealed doorway with flowers, dried lavender tied in bundles, tucked into the cracks of the boards. The scent drifts faintly into the night air, masking the sour rot. It's a small act of defiance, almost tender, as if saying, even if we must wait in fear, let us not be forgotten. Down another lane, a priest whispers prayers through a crack in the door to a family inside. His voice is steady, though his hands tremble. You notice he never steps close. He prays from a safe distance, his words floating through the gap. Faith is the only thing he can give. Whether it comforts or condemns, you can't tell. You press on, and the further you go, the more deserted the streets become. A strange thought occurs to you. Quarantine is not just about sickness. It's about silence. The usual sounds of life, neighbors chatting, children chasing dogs, merchants calling out, are muted. You're left with footsteps, an occasional crow, and the creak of boarded wood in the wind. One house stands out to you. A lantern burns in the window, casting a warm glow. You hear a faint melody from inside, a family singing together, voices blending in harmony.
They're locked in, yet they sing. The tune is soft, almost lullaby-like, carrying a sense of peace into the night air. For a moment, it's beautiful, even haunting. Not every locked house is quiet. From one you hear shouting, someone begging to be let out, fists pounding on wood. The sound makes your chest tighten. You step away quickly, heart racing, because you know nobody will come. Later, you notice the contrast between the rich and poor in quarantine. A grand townhouse has guards stationed outside, making sure nobody enters. Inside, servants bring food through side doors, leaving baskets at a distance. Meanwhile, a cramped shack on the next street sits silent. No sign of food, no sign of life. Quarantine draws lines sharper than poverty ever did. The town crier passes by, calling out new restrictions in a weary voice. No gatherings, no markets at certain hours, fines for breaking curfew. He looks as tired as everyone else, the words falling flat in the heavy air. The people listen from windows, but say nothing. Rules feel like a fragile wall against a flood. And still rumors spread. Some say the quarantine houses are cursed, that the sickness seeps through the boards like smoke. Others claim the city leaders use quarantine to rid themselves of troublesome families. You realize it doesn't matter whether these stories are true. Fear makes its own truth. And in the end, the doors stay shut. You pause at a crossroads, watching how different homes mark their isolation. One family ties white cloth to the shutters, hoping it signals purity. Another scratches symbols into the wood, circles, stars, crosses, desperate charms against fate. In the dim torchlight, the markings look eerie, almost like messages to the dead. Scholars still argue whether the fear of being locked away was worse than the sickness itself. As you walk, you can't shake that thought. To be trapped inside, waiting without control, seems its own form of torture. Freedom shrinks, not only of movement, but of spirit. The town feels less like a community, more like a series of small prisons. Yet even here, resilience flickers. You see a boy sitting by a shutter, talking softly to his friend in the house next door. They can't play together, but their voices carry through the wooden slats. They share jokes, laughter muffled, but still alive. Even walls can't fully kill connection. By the time you return to your lodging, the hush of quarantine lingers in your ears. The streets feel narrower, heavier, like a maze of silence. Behind each boarded door lies a mystery. Hope or despair. Prayer or panic. Life or death. You realize you'll never know all their stories, but you carry their echoes with you. The cries, the songs, the flowers pressed into cracks, the prayers whispered through wood. The city may survive because of quarantine, or it may crumble in spite of it. But tonight you've walked among its hidden chambers, and the weight of that silence will stay with you. The next morning greets you with the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, a sound both familiar and unsettling. You look up to see a group of figures moving slowly through the square. At first, you think they might be priests, but no, their outfits are far stranger. Long black robes hang to the ground, gloves cover their hands, and most striking of all, each of them wears a mask shaped like a bird's beak. The beak juts out from pale faces, curving downward like some enormous crow. Small glass lenses cover the eyes, giving them an almost insect-like appearance. They walk with measured steps, staffs in hand, tapping the ground as they pass. The people in the street shrink back, crossing themselves or muttering prayers. You realize these are plague doctors. Their very presence is a warning. Sickness lurks nearby. The masks, filled with herbs and flowers, are meant to filter poisoned air. You can smell faint traces of rosemary and mint drifting from them, though it does little to soften their eerie appearance. One doctor stops to inspect a patient sitting against a wall. The man's face is pale, a dark swelling visible on his neck. The doctor leans in, not too close, prodding gently with his staff. The patient winces but says nothing. Finally, the doctor straightens and shakes his head. Two attendants move forward with a cart, and the man is lifted away. You don't need to ask where he's going. There's a scholarly debate still whispered centuries later. Did these strange costumes actually protect the doctors, or were they just symbols of false hope? To you, in this moment, they look more like messengers of death than healers. The beaks, the robes, the slow, measured steps, they transform the ordinary street into a theater of dread. You follow them at a distance, unable to look away. They move from house to house, knocking softly, sometimes entering, sometimes leaving with stretchers. Every time they pass, the street grows quieter, as if even sound itself recoils. Then a quirky detail catches your eye. One of the doctors carries not just herbs in his mask, but also a small vial hanging from his belt. He pauses now and then to dab liquid onto his gloves, rubbing it in with ritual-like care. The liquid smells faintly of vinegar and roses, a personal charm perhaps, against the unseen miasma. Whether it works or not, it gives him a sense of control. You notice how the children react. A little girl peeks from behind her mother's skirts, staring wide-eyed at the bird-like figure. To her, it must look like some creature out of a nightmare. Yet she doesn't cry. Instead, she whispers, "Crow man," with something like awe. You wonder if in her dreams, the doctor will be a monster or a guardian. The presence of plague doctors also changes the mood of the townsfolk. When they appear, neighbors pull away from each other, avoiding contact, as though the very sight reminds them how fragile they are. A merchant closes his stall early, muttering that the doctors bring bad luck. A priest blesses himself 3 times. Even the dogs seem to grow silent, tails tucked. Later, you watch as one doctor kneels beside a child lying in the street. He holds a small mirror to the boy's lips, waiting to see if it fogs. It does not. The doctor bows his head for a moment, then signals for the body to be taken. The child is lifted gently, wrapped in cloth. There are no tears. His family must already be gone. You can't help but think about how these doctors live, moving constantly among the sick. Do they ever take off the masks? Do they sleep at night without hearing coughs in their dreams? The beaks make them faceless, almost inhuman. And yet behind the glass eyes there are real men, frightened, determined, maybe even resigned. Scholars still argue whether these doctors were true professionals or simply opportunists paid by desperate cities. But standing here, watching them vanish into the fog, you can sense both, a mix of duty and profit, compassion and fear. As the day fades, the image of the beaked masks lingers in your mind. They haunt the streets long after they're gone, a reminder that medicine itself seems strange and fragile in this time. That evening, you overhear 2 men in the tavern whispering about them. One insists the doctors carry secret cures, potions hidden beneath their robes. The other laughs bitterly, saying they only count the dead. "Crow men," he sneers, "feeding on fear." You sip your weak ale and realize both might be true. On your way back, you pass a boy who has drawn a crude picture of a plague doctor in chalk on the wall. The beak is exaggerated, the robe like a shadow. But the boy has added wings, as if to turn the doctor into an angel, or perhaps a carrion bird. It makes you pause. Even children, it seems, wrestle with what these figures mean. As the night deepens, you picture them still moving through the streets, tapping their staffs, whispering in their muffled voices, bending over bodies. The beaked masks, The herbs, the vinegar, the solemnity. They are not angels, nor demons, nor saviors, nor villains. They are simply men trying to stand between life and death in a world that no longer knows how to separate the two. And tomorrow, you know, they will walk again. The morning sun does little to chase away the heaviness of the city. You wander toward the edge of town and notice a field where wooden stakes rise like crooked teeth. On each, strips of cloth flutter in the breeze, tied with knots and charms. Villagers gather here, muttering prayers, leaving offerings, bread, coins, even locks of hair. They believe these small rituals will keep the sickness at bay. Superstition has become its own marketplace. You watch as an old woman peddles amulets carved from bone, promising they ward off evil airs. She wears a string of them herself, rattling like dice as she gestures. People hand her coins eagerly, clutching the charms to their chests. It strikes you that belief can be more nourishing than bread. Nearby, a man with wild eyes preaches from a barrel. He shouts that the plague is God's punishment for sin. His voice cracks as he points to women in the crowd, accusing them of vanity, of witchcraft, of angering heaven. The crowd listens, some nodding, others looking away. Fear makes his words feel heavier, even when they're cruel. You notice a quirky detail. A few children tied garlic bulbs around their necks, swinging like pendants. They giggle, pretending to chase away invisible demons. To them, it's almost a game. They don't know the weight of the fear that drives such rituals, only know garlic makes them feel safe. As you walk further, you stumble across a procession. Dozens of men march slowly, chanting in unison. Their backs are bare, streaked with blood. Each holds a whip with metal tips, striking themselves as they go. The sound is sharp, flesh tearing under leather. You wince, but the men keep marching, faces twisted in devotion. They are the flagellants, believing their suffering will atone for the sins that caused the plague. People line the streets to watch. Some kneel, whispering prayers. Others simply stare, wide-eyed as the line of bleeding men passes. You feel the rhythm of their chants vibrating in your chest. "Mercy, mercy," they cry, over and over. Scholars still argue whether these movements spread comfort or fear. Some towns welcomed them, believing the flagellants brought divine favor. Others feared they carried sickness with them, spreading the very thing they sought to cure. In the tavern later, you overhear talk of witch hunts. Rumors spread that old women with herbs are to blame, that they poison wells or curse cattle. Fear twists neighbors into enemies. One man claims he saw sparks fly from a woman's fingertips when she touched a cow. Another insists a widow's shadow moved differently than her body. The stories grow stranger the longer you listen, but nobody laughs. Belief in these days has sharper teeth than reason. A priest counters these whispers with his own. He says the stars are misaligned, that the heavens themselves signal doom. He gestures toward the night sky, pointing out constellations with trembling fingers. To him, the sickness is written above, a cosmic story playing out across the heavens. Later that night, you walk past doorways marked with protective symbols, chalk crosses, painted circles, bunches of herbs nailed above the lintels. One family burns incense constantly, smoke seeping from their windows like a perpetual prayer. The air smells thick and strange, clove and sage mingling with the sourness of the street. A quirky image lingers with you. A farmer leading a goat through the town square, whispering that the animal will carry away the sickness. He strokes its horns tenderly before releasing it beyond the gates. The crowd watches in silence as the goat wanders into the fields, a scapegoat, both literal and symbolic. You think about how superstition is both a comfort and a burden. It gives people something to do, a way to feel less helpless. Tie garlic, burn incense, whip your back raw. Each action says, I can fight this, even if I don't understand it. Yet you can't ignore the darker side. Suspicion of neighbors, punishments of the innocent. A world where logic is drowned by desperation. The next day you hear bells ringing and follow the sound to the church square. A ritual is underway. Candles flicker in dozens of hands, wax dripping onto fingers. The priest holds high a relic, a bone said to belong to a saint. The crowd presses closer, murmuring, reaching out to touch the air around it. Some believe even the sight of it can protect them. You catch the eye of one man who clutches a rosary so tightly his knuckles are white. He whispers prayers with such urgency, it feels less like devotion and more like bargaining. You sense he's not alone. Everywhere you look, people bargain with gods, saints, charms, stars, even goats. Bargains made in the currency of fear. Scholars still argue whether such rituals gave people strength to endure or distracted them from real solutions. But in this moment, standing in the candlelit square, you feel how powerful belief can be. It doesn't matter whether the relic is real or whether garlic truly wards off disease. What matters is that for a few minutes, people feel less alone. When you return to your lodging that night, you notice someone has hung a sprig of rosemary on your door. You didn't put it there. Perhaps it's a neighbor, offering protection. Perhaps it's simply habit, a ritual extended without thought. You leave it hanging, inhaling its faint scent, and let it soothe you. Superstition may not heal the body, but it softens the soul's trembling. And in a city weighed down by silence, sickness, and sorrow, that might be the closest thing to medicine anyone can find. The city is quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. It's the stillness of absence, of spaces left behind. You walk along a row of houses, and the silence presses heavy. Windows are shuttered, doors hanging open with no one inside. Cats slink through the thresholds, tails twitching, as if they now own what once belonged to families. You realize you're wandering through a neighborhood abandoned not by choice, but by death. It's not that everyone left, it's that they couldn't stay. Some houses bear faint signs of life, a chair tipped over, a blanket half folded, meals left unfinished on tables. In others, cobwebs already claim corners, dust gathering as though eager to erase what was once human. One house in particular stops you. The door creaks when the wind shifts, swinging on broken hinges. Inside, you glimpse toys scattered on the floor, small shoes by the hearth. But there are no children, no laughter. The hearth is cold, the silence absolute. You step back quickly, heart aching with the weight of absence. A stray dog trots past, pausing at another house. It scratches at the door, whining softly, before giving up and moving on. Even animals sense the emptiness. Scholars still argue about the numbers. How many towns lost half, two-thirds, sometimes nearly everyone? The records blur with grief and exaggeration, but walking these hollow streets, you don't need numbers. The truth lies in the hollow windows, the dust settling on plates never cleared. You wander further and find an entire street blocked by carts piled high with abandoned belongings. Chests, clothes, tools, everything left behind in haste or despair. Some things are valuable, some worthless, but all of them feel the same now, remnants of lives cut short. A cracked mirror leans against a wheel, reflecting your face back at you. For a moment, it feels like the mirror is asking whether you'll be the next ghost to leave things behind. Among the ruins, quirky details jump out. On a wall, someone painted bright flowers, bold strokes of red and yellow. The colors still shine, stubbornly cheerful in the midst of emptiness. On a doorstep, a clay jug sits filled with dried herbs, as though someone believed it would guard the threshold. These little touches, these stubborn gestures, whisper of hope that once fought to linger. As night falls, you hear the eerie sound of footsteps echoing in streets that should be full but aren't. You realize it's your own footsteps, bouncing back from empty walls. The city feels like a stage stripped of actors, the scenery left standing with no one to play their parts. You pass a churchyard and notice hastily dug graves, mounds of earth uneven and raw. Some graves have wooden crosses, others none at all. It's clear there weren't enough hands to bury everyone properly. The ground itself seems overwhelmed. In one corner, someone has built a small shrine. A candle flickers beside a pile of pebbles, each stone perhaps representing a name, a memory, a prayer. You kneel for a moment, not out of duty, but because the quiet asks it of you. The flame trembles in the breeze, a fragile reminder that even here, among the forgotten, light still lingers. The morning brings a sound you've grown used to, but never comfortable with. The low, steady creak of wooden wheels on cobblestones. You step outside and see the source. A cart, draped in rough cloth, pulled by a tired mule. Behind it walks a man ringing a bell, his voice flat and weary as he calls, "Bring out your dead!" The phrase cuts through the quiet streets like a knife. Doors open reluctantly. Neighbors carry out bodies wrapped in sheets, sometimes two men struggling under the weight. Some are stiff, some still faintly warm, but all are the same in the end. They're laid onto the cart, one after another, stacked like firewood. You notice the details. A hand slips out from under a shroud, pale fingers curled as if still reaching for something. A lock of hair tumbles free as the cart jolts. The bell continues to toll, a rhythm of finality, each clang marking another soul surrendered. A child clings to her mother as they watch their neighbor's body lifted away. The little girl asks quietly where the man is going. The mother shushes her, but you see tears streaking her face. There are no comforting answers left. Scholars still argue about how organized these collections were, whether they were done by official decree or simply desperate neighbors banding together. In practice, it hardly matters. The effect is the same. Death has become routine, picked up like laundry, carried away without ceremony.
We live leading the Word of God. The vast majority of the time, this is not as simple as acting on the impulse. You'll be reading your Bible, and you will see a line or a verse surface in your spirit that will explicitly describe what God wants you to do with it. You're not going to have to guess. You will instantly know whether it's a truth about God to apply to your own life or a command to obey.
The city feels quieter now, though not in a peaceful way. It's the kind of quiet that settles when people stop asking questions. You walk through the narrow streets, and the voices that once spilled out from taverns, markets, and churchyards have thinned into whispers. Strangely, something new fills that silence. Stories. People tell them in hushed tones, leaning close as if afraid the air itself might listen. You pause by a baker's stall, long empty of bread, and hear two women murmuring about a plague doctor who can supposedly cure the sick with nothing more than a touch of his staff. They swear he wears a mask like a bird with herbs tucked inside to ward off the pestilence. You imagine the scene, a tall figure striding through the streets, beak-like mask gleaming, robes swaying. The odd detail that sticks with you is the scent. Those masks were stuffed with rosemary, cloves and lavender, so the doctors walked in a constant cloud of perfume. You can almost smell it, sharp and sweet, a ghostly attempt to overpower the stench of decay. But the stories don't stop there. Down by a water well, someone whispers that cats are the cause of all this misery, agents of witches or devils. A boy takes the story to heart and starts chasing strays with a stick. It's ironic, cats might have helped by hunting the rats that carried the fleas. History has a way of punishing its best allies. Scholars still argue whether such beliefs made the plague worse by redirecting anger and leading to more rats, or whether people would have suffered just as much regardless. To you, in this moment, the argument feels cruelly academic. What matters is that neighbors start looking at one another with suspicion, eyes narrowed, trust eroding like plaster on damp walls. You drift toward the churchyard. A priest is preaching under a gray sky, his voice cracking from exhaustion. He tells the crowd the plague is God's punishment for their sins, greed, lust, pride, all bundled together into this invisible wrath. His words are sharp, but you notice even he keeps glancing at the shadows between sentences, as if half expecting death to tap him on the shoulder. Someone in the crowd laughs bitterly and mutters that the wealthy still dine well behind closed doors while the poor bury their children. That anger spreads like sparks on dry straw. The priest raises his voice, but his sermon feels fragile, like glass about to crack. Later that evening, you join a circle around a fire. Neighbors share wine that tastes more like vinegar, and the flames cast faces in shifting orange. A woman tells a tale she swears is true. A village not far away danced in the streets for 3 nights straight, believing joy would drive the sickness away. She describes the scene: torches blazing, fiddles screeching, feet stomping on the cobbles. The odd detail is how their shoes wore through, soles flapping, yet they kept dancing until their legs gave out. The group around you laughs nervously, unsure whether to believe. It doesn't matter. The story itself has power. In a world where no one controls anything, tales are currency. They offer explanations, or at least distractions. You hear another tale. A merchant who drank nothing but ale and survived, while his family perished. Proof, someone insists, that beer wards off the plague. You glance at the mug in your hand, suddenly more grateful for its bitter taste. Scholars still argue whether lower contamination in beer really made it safer than water, but in this moment, it feels like salvation. The night deepens. A stray dog slinks past, ribs showing, and someone spits, saying dogs carry the plague too. Another insists dogs are blessed and should be left alone. The argument peters out into silence. The fire crackles. Everyone stares into it as though answers might rise from the flames. You notice how stories are changing the rhythm of life. Instead of gossip about markets or weddings, it's myths of survival, rumors of cures, warnings of curses. They weave into the city's identity, shaping how people act, how they treat one another, even how they mourn. At one corner, a child draws chalk symbols on a wall: a sun, a cross, and a crude bird mask. She says softly that if she draws enough, the plague won't enter her house. Her mother doesn't stop her. Maybe she believes it too. The drawing smudges in the rain, but the hope behind it lingers. Walking home, you think about how fear breeds creativity. Stories don't just explain the plague, they're shields, small defenses against the overwhelming unknown. Even if false, they give people something to hold. And you, listening tonight, carry them too, feeling the strange mix of dread and comfort they bring. When you finally lie down, the city hums faintly around you. Somewhere, a bell tolls again. Somewhere else, laughter bursts briefly before collapsing into silence. In between, the stories flow like an underground river, shaping how everyone dreams, how they wake, and how they face the morning,
knowing it may bring another cart, another pit, another toll of the bell. The city wakes slowly, under a sky painted in pale gray and streaks of amber. You step into the streets and notice the quiet tension that has become familiar. Even the birds seem wary, hopping from rooftops instead of singing, wings tucked close as though they, too, understand the danger that hangs in the air. A merchant sets up his stall, cautiously placing small piles of bread on the counter. He keeps glancing around, counting heads, measuring how many are healthy enough to buy. You notice a peculiar detail. One loaf is covered with a cloth sprinkled with herbs. The merchant tells a customer it protects the buyer from disease. Scholars still argue whether such practices offered any real benefit or were purely psychological, but to the people here, it's reassurance enough. You wander past a public fountain, usually lively with children splashing, laughter echoing against stone walls. Today, the fountain stands almost empty, only one small boy dipping his hands carefully into the water. He glances at you, hesitates, then whispers, "It's safe if you don't drink too much." The caution in his voice makes your chest tighten. Even children learn fear quickly in times like this. A few steps later, you come across a street musician. His lute has strings broken, his voice hoarse, yet he sings a tune that feels impossibly cheerful. Passers-by drop a coin or two without speaking, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. Music is a fragile comfort, threading through the city's tension. You realize it's one of the few things left untouched by sickness, an act of defiance, a whisper of normalcy. Then, you see the unusual sight of people carrying water jugs, forming small lines at wells, keeping careful distances. They exchange no words, just nods. Hygiene has become ritualistic. Every dip of the bucket is deliberate, every sip guarded. Superstition and logic entwine. Washing hands is useful, yet sprinkling holy water over the mouth is equally believed to prevent death. Oddly, both coexist seamlessly here. A quirky detail catches your attention. A woman balances a basket of eggs on her head while crossing the square. She wears gloves made of cloth tied around her hands, and each egg is wrapped in a leaf. She explains that the leaves protect the eggs from miasma. You laugh softly, realizing that even practicality bends to fear. As you move along, you notice a group of flagellants marching silently. They are fewer than before, their pace slower, their cries muffled. They have become a spectacle that nobody entirely trusts, but nobody can ignore. Their bare backs are scarred from weeks of self-punishment, and yet they continue, believing that suffering might avert the plague's wrath. Scholars still debate whether such practices truly calmed communal anxiety or merely increased exposure. You find yourself drawn toward the outskirts, where the sick are cared for. A makeshift hospital occupies an old barn. Inside, straw mats line the floor, each occupied by someone feverish, sweating, sometimes moaning. Attendants move between the mats offering water or a bit of broth. Fear keeps them cautious. They touch as little as possible, whisper instructions, and retreat quickly. You see how exhaustion weighs on everyone, the sick, the caregivers, even the volunteers who have come only for short stints. A curious detail stands out. One patient has tied a small bird feather above his mat. He claims it will carry away the illness. The feather sways slightly in the draft, a delicate symbol of hope in a room heavy with suffering. You realize these little acts, seemingly insignificant, are lifelines for those whose days are measured in breaths and heartbeats. Outside the barn, you watch as townsfolk distribute food. The wealthy contribute dried bread and salted fish. The poor offer what little they have: onions, wilted greens, scraps. It's a moment of fragile unity, a brief suspension of suspicion and fear. People exchange small smiles, even laughter, as though clinging to the human connection that the plague tries to snatch away.
Later, you wander past a cemetery newly dug. Graves line the edge of town, marked with simple crosses. Some have names, some just a date and an initial. You noticed a mother kneeling at one, her child clinging to her skirts. She whispers a story to the grave, recounting the day she last saw her son. Even here, grief and ritual mingle. The act of remembering becomes both defiance and solace, a way to assert life in the face of overwhelming loss. As evening falls, candles are lit in windows. Families still surviving pause to pray, even those who never did before. The streets glow faintly with flickering light, a pattern that feels almost protective. You pause and watch the flames dance, their reflections in puddles on the cobblestones creating twin worlds of light and shadow. Scholars still argue about the social impact of these small, persistent rituals, whether they helped communities endure or merely delayed despair. Standing here, you sense that perhaps both are true. The rituals, the precautions, the acts of small kindness. They form a fragile network holding the city together even as death continues to thread through its veins. Finally, you return to your lodging, carrying the weight of what you've seen. The city hums quietly outside, alive with fear, hope, grief, and determination. You notice the smell of baking bread, faint and comforting, mingling with herbs hanging from doors and windows. Somewhere a child laughs, a musician strums, a dog barks. Life persists in tiny, stubborn ways. You lie down listening to the distant tolling of the bell. Tonight, unlike previous nights, it feels less like doom and more like a rhythm. An acknowledgement that, despite all, the city continues to breathe. And you, walking among its shadows, stories, and rituals, are witness to its stubborn survival.
The city awakens slowly, fog rolling over rooftops like a pale blanket. You wander through the streets and notice a subtle change. The living have started to adapt. Fear hasn't vanished, but it has transformed into routine. People move carefully, wash their hands more often, and avoid the worst of crowded spaces. Small gestures of protection thread through daily life, like invisible stitching holding the city together. You pass a baker's stall where bread is now sold in individual wrappers tied with string. It seems absurdly modern, yet here it is, a sign of adaptation. A curious detail catches your eye, a small sprig of rosemary tied to the string of each loaf. The baker whispers that it's for the air, for the safe breath of the buyer. Scholars still argue whether such practices had any real effect, but it's clear the gesture brings comfort. A child runs past, carrying a toy he fashioned from scraps of wood and cloth. He pauses to watch a stray cat slink across the street. The boy mutters to himself that the cat is good luck. You notice the light in his eyes, innocence stubbornly clinging to life's little joys despite everything around him. Down an alley, a group of women wash clothes in a trough of water, gossiping quietly about neighbors and relatives. One speaks of a distant village where everyone danced to keep the plague away. Another whispers about a man cured after drinking a special herbal concoction. The stories flow, some believable, some exaggerated, but they offer connection, a way to share hope in a world dominated by fear. A priest moves silently past, carrying a small vial of holy water. He sprinkles it outside doors and across thresholds, murmuring prayers for protection. Oddly, his routine has become expected. People nod as he passes, offering slight smiles, gestures of acknowledgement. Faith, ritual, and superstition now coexist seamlessly, blending into the rhythm of the city. You wander toward a square where the market is reopening. Stalls are modest, the merchants cautious. A woman sells onions, offering them in bundles wrapped with protective herbs. A man across the way peddles cloth, insisting it protects against bad air. The interplay of commerce and precaution has created its own strange ecosystem. Fear fuels trade, and trade, in turn, reinforces survival. Quirky details appear everywhere. A boy ties garlic cloves to a string, hanging it around his mother's neck. A cat pauses near a chalk cross drawn outside a shuttered home. An old woman prays to a painting of a saint, muttering that her prayers are stronger than any illness. Life persists in these small, almost absurd acts. You pause near a fountain where people cautiously collect water. The rhythm of their movement is careful, methodical. One woman instructs her daughter on how to dip the bucket without touching the rim. Scholars still debate whether such practices significantly slowed the spread, but today they give the illusion of control, and in desperate times, illusion can be a lifeline. As the day warms, the sounds of life return incrementally. A dog barks in the distance. A merchant shouts softly, advertising onions. Children's laughter peeks through narrow streets. You realize how remarkable it is, even in the shadow of so much death, the human instinct to live, to connect, to create, persists. Later, you find yourself in a small square where musicians gather. A fiddler tunes his instrument. A boy claps rhythmically, and a woman hums along. Their music is rough, imperfect, yet it fills the streets with something the plague cannot take: joy, community, resistance. You can see the odd contrast. A house behind them has its windows shuttered, the family inside fighting illness, while outside, music flows freely, refusing to be silenced. By evening, the smell of cooking drifts through the air. People prepare modest meals, sharing portions with neighbors when they can. You notice someone leaving a small loaf on a windowsill, perhaps an offering, perhaps a simple act of kindness. Each gesture, however minor, feels magnified in importance. Humanity, it seems, thrives in the smallest acts during the darkest times. You wander past a cemetery, now quieter than before. Fresh graves have slowed. The city is beginning to stabilize. Candles flicker on some mounds, tiny lights marking memory. You watch a mother trace the shape of her child's name in the dirt, her fingers gentle, deliberate. Grief remains, but the frenzy has ebbed, replaced by quiet endurance. Scholars still argue whether the combination of adaptation, ritual, and practical measures saved more lives than medicine alone. From where you stand, watching the city move, laugh, and survive despite fear, you sense their truth. Resilience is more than knowledge. It's habit, ritual, community, and stubborn hope. As night falls, lanterns glow across the city. People retreat indoors, windows open to catch the cool evening air. You notice the odd, small comforts that persist: herbs dangling above doors, a stray dog curled in a hearth, music soft and persistent. Life continues, fragile but unyielding. You settle into your lodging, listening to the distant sound of a bell. It no longer feels solely like doom. Its rhythm, marking the hours survived, another day endured. Outside, the city breathes in measured, careful beats. You realize you've witnessed not just devastation, but adaptation, resilience, and the quiet persistence of life in its smallest forms. The morning air carries the faint tang of smoke from hearths and the lingering scent of herbs tied above doorways.
You step into the streets and notice a subtle shift. The city has begun to reclaim rhythm, even amid caution. Merchants speak softly but confidently. Children play quietly near doorways, and neighbors greet one another with nods instead of distant suspicion. Life is returning, but in careful increments. You pause by a fountain where water ripples gently. A woman lowers her bucket with precision, keeping her hands from touching the rim. She murmurs instructions to her daughter, teaching her a rhythm, a ritual that feels almost sacred. Oddly, it's not just hygiene, it's a way to impose order in a chaotic world. Scholars still debate whether such practices had measurable effects on infection rates, but to the people here, the act itself carries meaning. Down the street, a baker arranges small loaves of bread, some wrapped with sprigs of rosemary. He glances toward a window where a child watches hungrily, and he tosses a coin for her mother to cover the cost. Quirky acts of generosity like this have become common. People are not just surviving, they are attempting to live with care and conscience. A priest walks past, carrying a vial of holy water, sprinkling thresholds with whispered prayers. Even those who have abandoned formal religion nod, acknowledging the ritual. It is less about faith and more about participation in a shared strategy for coping. The act reassures the community, a symbol that they are not alone in confronting the unseen. You notice a small group of women planting herbs in window boxes, their hands moving quickly but deliberately. Thyme, sage, rosemary, all chosen for their reputed protective qualities. The scent mingles with the morning air, faint but persistent, creating a tapestry of aromas both comforting and protective. It strikes you how superstition and practicality have intertwined into daily life. In a nearby alley, a boy scampers past with a makeshift toy, a small bird fashioned from scraps of wood and cloth. He pauses to watch a stray cat weave between stones, muttering, "The cat brings good luck." Even in the shadow of the plague, children invent stories, charms, and games to wrest control from an uncontrollable world. You wander toward the marketplace, where stalls display goods cautiously. Merchants still measure distance between buyers and sellers, some wearing simple cloth masks. A man sells cloth for protective garments, explaining that weaving herbs into pockets wards off sickness. Scholars still argue whether these measures had any effect on disease transmission. But for the townsfolk, ritualized protection offers comfort, a tangible attempt to survive. A curious detail captures your attention. A woman carries a jug of water, but also ties a small feather to the handle. She whispers to it, claiming the feather will carry illness away. The simplicity of the gesture strikes you. In a world dominated by uncertainty, small acts, sometimes absurd, become lifelines of hope. Across the square, a group of musicians gathers. The sound is raw, unpolished, but lively. A fiddler plays off-key, a boy claps along, a woman hums harmonies. Passerbys pause, dropping coins into an upturned hat, nodding, smiling faintly. Music, fragile yet persistent, becomes a statement. Life continues, even when death looms. You notice the contrast behind the scene. In one building, windows are shuttered, families huddled indoors, fighting illness or mourning. Outside, music and chatter persist, creating parallel worlds, one of fear and quiet suffering, the other of defiance and connection. Oddly, the two coexist without conflict, each giving meaning to the other. Later, you find yourself near a newly dug cemetery. The pace of burials has slowed, signaling some measure of control. Candles flicker on freshly dug graves, tiny lights marking remembrance. A mother traces her child's name in the dirt, fingers gentle, deliberate. Grief has softened from frantic despair into quiet endurance. Scholars still debate the long-term effects of these daily rituals, superstition, and small acts of care. Did they save lives, or did they merely soothe anxiety? Standing here, you sense that their greatest power was less about medicine and more about humanity, maintaining social bonds, shared rituals, and hope against the backdrop of mortality. As evening falls, lanterns glow across streets, casting shadows that dance and sway. People retreat indoors, but leave windows open, catching the cool breeze. The smell of herbs, bread, and faint smoke mingles in the air. Somewhere, a dog snores by a hearth. A child hums softly. Even in the smallest, quietest ways, the city is reclaiming life. You pause on a doorstep, watching the lanterns flicker. Each tiny flame, fragile and trembling, seems determined to survive the darkness. The contrast between these small lights and the shadows around them feels symbolic. Fear is present, yet life persists. Finally, you return to your lodging, exhausted but aware. The city hums with measured beats of survival. Music, ritual, herbs, and bread intertwine, forming a fragile network of life against the omnipresent shadow of plague. Tonight, the bell tolls more softly, less ominous, a reminder that the city endures one careful day at a time.
Dawn breaks slowly, pale light spilling across the city rooftops. You step into the streets and immediately notice the subtle rhythm of recovery. The air is sharper, the stench of decay diminished, though never entirely gone. People move deliberately, carrying baskets, tending small gardens, and sharing whispered greetings. Life is careful now, measured, yet undeniably present. You wander past a market stall where herbs are displayed neatly in bundles: sage, rosemary, thyme. A merchant explains that these are for protection, speaking to both tradition and hope. Oddly, a small sparrow hops along the counter, picking at crumbs, entirely unafraid of the bustle. The incongruity makes you smile. Nature, as ever, continues alongside human fear. A child runs past with a wooden horse, its paint chipped and faded. She stops to tie a string of garlic around her wrist, whispering that it will keep her safe. Her mother watches silently, nodding. Scholars still argue whether such charms offered any real protection, but to those involved, the act itself carries meaning, an assertion of agency in a world governed by chance. Further down the street, you hear the faint sound of a lute. A musician sits by a fountain, fingers moving skillfully across the strings. A small crowd gathers, children clapping, adults nodding quietly. Music has become a lifeline, a way to reclaim joy and community, even amidst fear. You notice that, even in the simplest acts, people are asserting life against the pervasive shadow of death. At the edge of town, you encounter a small group of flagellants. Their bare backs are scarred, their movements slower than before. They chant softly, rhythmically, each self-inflicted mark a form of penance or protection, or perhaps both. The odd detail: one man has tied a small feather to his whip, claiming it will carry away the illness. Scholars still debate whether these rituals offered communal solace or merely heightened exposure, but standing there, you feel the raw human determination to fight invisible forces. Nearby, a woman carries a basket of eggs, each wrapped in leaves for protection. She balances it carefully on her hip, muttering quietly, explaining that the leaves ward off bad airs. You notice her careful eyes, scanning the street for others, her movements deliberate. Even practical chores have become imbued with ritual, each motion a tiny act of defiance against uncertainty. You wandered toward a fountain where children play cautiously, dipping hands but avoiding splashes. One boy whispers to another about a distant village where laughter is said to repel illness. You can't help but notice how stories, superstition, and small joys interweave, sustaining the city's fragile morale. A bakery nearby smells faintly of fresh bread. The baker hands a loaf to a woman who cannot pay, and she bows, placing a sprig of rosemary on the counter in return. Odd gestures like this seem to have multiplied, small exchanges of kindness and ritual woven into daily survival. Life is reclaiming spaces once emptied by despair. Later, you pass a cemetery where graves now seem to breathe, softened by care. Candles flicker on mounds, casting warm, trembling light. A mother smooths the dirt over her child's resting place, tracing names delicately. Grief persists, but has found rhythm, shaped now by memory and ritual rather than panic. You notice small acts everywhere: herbs hanging above doors, stray cats curling in sunbeams, children playing with handmade toys. Each gesture is a fragment of resilience. Scholars still argue whether social adaptations or medical interventions saved more lives, but from here, it feels clear. The city's survival relies on both the tangible and intangible, the rituals, stories, and care that knit people together. As night falls, lanterns are lit along streets, creating soft pools of light. Music drifts from one corner to another. Faint laughter bubbles from a window. You pause on a doorstep, inhaling the mingling scents of bread, herbs, and smoke. Life persists quietly, subtly, in ways both fragile and stubborn. Finally, you retreat to your lodging, listening to the bell toll in the distance. It no longer feels like a harbinger of doom, but a marker of endurance, a rhythmic acknowledgement that life continues in careful, deliberate beats. Outside, the city breathes, and you, having walked its streets, feel that persistence, quiet, resilient, unwavering. The morning air is crisp, carrying hints of herbs, smoke, and the faint tang of damp stone. You step into the streets and notice something remarkable: movement without panic. People walk with purpose, their steps measured, gestures deliberate. Life has returned in fragments, small and careful, yet undeniably alive. You wander past a market where merchants arrange goods neatly: loaves of bread, bundles of onions, herbs tied in protective bunches. A small girl tugs at her mother's skirt, pointing at a string of garlic dangling from the stall. The mother nods approvingly, explaining that it keeps evil airs away. Oddly, you notice a sparrow hopping along the counter, unbothered by human presence. Even in fear, nature carries on its own rhythm. Down an alley, a boy spins a makeshift top, carved from wood and painted with bright colors. He ties a tiny feather to it, whispering that it will bring good luck. You watch him, heart lifting at his stubbornness. Scholars still argue whether these charms had any protective value, but here it is clear. Belief and imagination serve as survival tools, tiny defiance against uncertainty. You approach a fountain where women wash clothes, their movements careful, methodical. One woman teaches a child to avoid splashes and touch, infusing ritual into even mundane chores. Every gesture has meaning now, practical and symbolic,
an assertion of control in an uncontrollable world. Across the square, musicians gather. The sound is raw, off-key at times, yet it fills the streets with life. A man strums a lute, a woman taps a tambourine. Children clap along. People stop to listen, nodding quietly. Music has become an act of resilience, a communal heartbeat, reminding everyone that joy persists even in shadowed times. At the edge of town, a group of flagellants moves slowly. Their backs are scarred from weeks of self-inflicted punishment. They chant softly, ritualized pain mingled with devotion, belief, and fear. One man has tied a small sprig of rosemary to his whip, claiming it will ward off the plague. Scholars still debate whether such acts comforted communities or spread the disease further, but standing here, you feel the human determination to combat unseen forces. A woman balances a basket of eggs on her hip, each wrapped in a leaf for protection. She moves cautiously, whispering instructions to her child. You notice her eyes scan constantly, alert, protective. Even ordinary chores have transformed into rituals, small battles against uncertainty and mortality. You wander past a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread mingles with faint smoke. The baker hands a loaf to a mother who cannot pay. In return, she leaves a sprig of rosemary, a gesture both practical and symbolic. These small exchanges, repeated throughout the city, sustain both morale and community. Later, you approach a cemetery. Graves have slowed in frequency, marked now with small candles and tokens of remembrance. A mother smooths dirt over a child's grave, tracing letters gently with her fingers. Grief has shifted from frantic panic to ritualized memory. Each act preserves life in another form: memory, care, and continuity. Quirky details persist. Stray cats weaving through alleys, children laughing softly while playing with handcrafted toys, herbs dangling from doorways. Scholars debate whether these behaviors contributed to survival, yet you sense a deeper truth. Survival depends not just on medicine, but on human resilience expressed through ritual, community, and small acts of hope. As evening falls, lanterns glow softly in windows. Music drifts faintly from multiple corners. Laughter threads through quiet streets, and the scent of herbs and bread lingers in the air. Life, delicate yet persistent, thrives in subtle, determined ways. Finally, you return to your lodging. The bell tolls in the distance, less ominous now, more a rhythmic marker of endurance. Outside, the city breathes carefully, measured, resilient. You lie down, the weight of what you've witnessed settling in your chest. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, the world feels fragile, but alive. A testament to human stubbornness, adaptation, and hope amidst shadows. The morning is cool, tinged with mist curling around rooftops, and the city hums a cautious rhythm. You step out into streets that are quieter than usual, not because of fear, but because of something new: tension. Word has spread of a heated argument on the beach by the shore, where the recently arrived travelers, a couple, are facing a storm not of nature, but of emotion. You wander toward the sand, noticing how the waves crash rhythmically against the shore. The tide is calm yet persistent, a contrast to the raised voices you hear. The couple stands close, facing each other with expressions full of frustration and hurt. The monkey vlogger, recognizable with his red and white raglan-style t-shirt, gestures wildly, his face a mix of worry and stubborn pride. His wife, a 24-year-old human woman, shakes her head, arms crossed, clearly exasperated. "You promised we'd explore Goa together today," she snaps, her voice sharper than the sea breeze. The monkey vlogger scratches behind his ear, looking flustered. I know, but the guide got delayed and I thought," he stammers. The argument is a strange mix of mundane travel mishap and deep emotional stakes, amplified by the isolation of the empty beach. Quirky details catch your eye. A crab scuttles across the sand, pausing briefly near the couple's feet, oblivious to the drama. The woman kicks at a small stone, sending it skittering into the water. Nearby, a sandcastle half-built leans precariously, slowly being swallowed by the incoming tide, a subtle metaphor for fleeting patience. Scholars still argue about how stress and isolation intensify arguments, especially in unfamiliar surroundings, and standing here, you can see the truth of that. The monkey vlogger gestures toward a coconut vendor in the distance. "See, I was just trying to get us refreshments," he says, but his words do little to soften the tension. The woman folds her arms tighter, voice trembling slightly. "You didn't even ask me. You just decided." Her frustration is not just about the coconut, it's about feeling unheard, left out of the plans that were supposed to be shared. A local dog trots past, ears flicking, pausing to sniff the sand near them. Its carefree behavior contrasts sharply with the charged human emotions. Oddly, it makes the monkey vlogger pause, as if realizing how trivial his worries appear against the broader world, yet the tension persists. Nearby, a police patrol approaches, drawn by the raised voices. Two officers walk briskly along the shoreline, their presence adding a layer of authority and unease. The couple notices them and freezes for a moment. "We're just talking," the monkey says, trying to reassure both his wife and the officers. The woman, still flustered, mutters that the talking has gotten far too loud. The officers glance at them, one with a raised eyebrow. "Ma'am, sir," the taller one begins, voice firm but not unkind. "We received a report of a disturbance. What's going on here?" The monkey vlogger gestures with both hands, eyes wide, as if explaining everything at once, yet somehow saying nothing concrete. His human wife steps forward, voice steady but tense, detailing the disagreement about their honeymoon plans. Scholars still debate whether small public disputes are more noticeable when a tourist couple is involved or when local communities are attentive, but the scene unfolding here feels painfully human and unavoidably public. The officers listen patiently, occasionally nodding, their presence transforming the emotional landscape of the argument. The tide rises slightly, and the sound of waves crashing punctuates the dialogue. The monkey vlogger attempts a conciliatory gesture, bowing slightly and holding out his hand. The woman recoils briefly, then relaxes, unsure whether to take it. The police remain alert, but not intrusive, giving the couple room while keeping the situation contained. Oddly, the sea itself seems to participate, waves lapping closer, sand shifting beneath their feet. The monkey vlogger scratches his head again, muttering, "I really thought I could fix this." The woman exhales sharply, her shoulders sagging in a mix of anger and relief. Relief that the argument has a contained audience, and anger at the disruption itself. Nearby, a sandcastle collapses under the tide, unnoticed by the couple, but symbolic. Even the smallest structures, carefully built, can be undone in an instant. The monkey vlogger glances down at it, eyebrows raised, perhaps subconsciously recognizing the metaphor. The woman sighs, muttering about patience, travel mishaps, and promises unkept. As the police prepare to leave, one officer says quietly, "Make sure this doesn't escalate. Enjoy the beach." The couple nods, somewhat embarrassed. The tension lingers, but the presence of authority has added a boundary, a framework within which they must navigate their emotions. Scholars still debate whether such minor interventions prevent further conflict or simply delay it, but here it provides a temporary reprieve. Finally, the couple walks along the shoreline, slowly reconciling, each step deliberate, measured, as if the tide itself is teaching patience. The monkey vlogger pauses, looking out at the horizon, while his wife walks slightly ahead, arms folded but less rigid. The sea whispers, the sand yields, and life, even in small disputes, continues its ebb and flow.
The sun rises higher, casting a golden sheen across the beach. You watch the couple walking along the sand, their footsteps leaving fleeting impressions that the tide will soon erase. The argument hasn't ended, merely shifted to quieter tones, each word carrying the weight of expectations and disappointment. "You promised me before the wedding," the woman says softly, voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and hurt. "You said we'd take this trip together, every step of it, without compromises." She glances at him, eyes searching for acknowledgement, for the sincerity she once believed in. The monkey vlogger scratches behind his ear, shifting uncomfortably. His shoulders slump slightly, a silent admission of failure. A quirky detail catches your eye. A coconut drifts near the shore, bobbing gently in the waves. It's a small, absurd object in the midst of emotional turbulence, yet somehow it mirrors their situation. A promise floating, untethered, waiting for careful hands to reclaim it. Scholars still argue whether physical objects in shared spaces influence human emotion or merely serve as distractions. But the symbolism here is tangible. He reaches out, attempting to explain, "I didn't mean to break my promise. Everything went wrong with the schedule, the boat. I thought I could fix it." His words, though earnest, stumble, weighed down by the tension between intention and perception. She shakes her head, voice firmer now. "It's not just about the schedule. It's about feeling left out, not prioritized, like our plans weren't important to you." The tide laps closer, foam brushing their feet, grounding them in the moment. A gull cries overhead, wings slicing the sky, indifferent to human emotions. Oddly, it's comforting in its neutrality. The world continues, whether promises are kept or broken. Nearby, a stray dog trots past, sniffing at a half-buried stick. The monkey vlogger pauses, following its movement with his eyes, momentarily distracted. The woman notices his gaze and sighs, a mix of exasperation and a subtle hint of amusement. Life insists on continuing indifferent to human disputes. The police patrol from earlier remains in the distance, a silent backdrop. Their presence is subtle, yet grounding, a reminder that even in personal turmoil, societal boundaries and norms persist. The couple walks parallel to them for a moment, the tension easing slightly, as if the structured gaze of authority imposes a limit on how far anger and disappointment can spill into chaos. You notice the meticulous detail of the woman's posture. Arms crossed, shoulders rigid at first, gradually softening with each step. Her eyes, though still sharp, occasionally glance at the horizon, as if seeking perspective. The monkey vlogger's movements mirror hers in hesitation, an unspoken negotiation between regret, guilt, and hope. A quirky element surfaces. The sand castle they accidentally disturbed earlier has been partially rebuilt by a local child, smoothing its edges, adding new towers. The monkey vlogger glances down, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Sometimes you realize the world repairs itself quietly, whether we intend it or not. Scholars still debate the psychological impact of witnessing small acts of creation during stress. Yet here it's tangible, a subtle reminder of resilience. The conversation between the couple softens, though tension remains. She explains specific feelings, being overlooked, anxious, and uncertain, while he listens, nodding, occasionally reaching out to brush sand from her shoulder. Words are exchanged more carefully now, measured against each other's reactions, aiming to rebuild trust after a brief but intense emotional storm. The sun dips slightly, casting long shadows. Waves continue their rhythm, a constant in contrast to the fluctuating human emotions. The monkey vlogger finally says, "I understand now. I should have communicated better, included you in the decisions." The woman's gaze softens marginally, voice quieter. "It's not just words. I need to see it in actions too." The tide rises again, smoothing their footprints, erasing immediate evidence of conflict. Oddly, the sand's impartiality feels reassuring. It reminds them, and you, that while disagreements leave impressions, they need not be permanent. Every argument can be reset, reframed, rebuilt with care. Finally, they pause at the water's edge, the couple standing side by side, but not yet holding hands. The monkey vlogger glances at his wife. She glances back, both considering the distance between intention and action. The waves lap gently at their feet. Rhythmic, patient, indifferent to human timelines, yet profoundly grounding. Scholars still debate the role of shared natural experiences in reconciliation, but here it feels instinctively restorative. The sea teaches patience, observation, and perspective. As you watch, the couple begins a tentative conversation about practical next steps, plans they can both agree on. The argument has not vanished, but it has evolved, from raised voices to thoughtful discussion, from frustration to mutual acknowledgement. The scene is small, intimate, and unmistakably human, a microcosm of countless disputes and reconciliations that occur daily across the world.
The late afternoon sun glows warmly across the beach, casting long golden shadows over the sand. You watch the couple slowly walking side by side, the tension from earlier softened but not entirely gone. The air smells faintly of salt and coconut husks, and the gentle hiss of waves provides a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. "You know," the monkey vlogger mutters, scratching his head, "I really didn't mean to ruin today. I just wanted it to be perfect." His voice carries a mix of guilt and hope, trying to bridge the emotional gap that still lingers between them. She glances at him, expressions softening slightly, but her arms remain crossed. "It's not just about perfection," she says quietly. "It's about feeling like we're making this together." A quirky detail catches your attention. A crab scuttles along the wet sand, narrowly avoiding their feet. Its movement is hasty, purposeful, and somehow amusing, a tiny moment of levity amid their emotional reconciliation. Scholars still debate how minor environmental distractions like these influence human emotional states, but you can't help but notice that the couple's gaze shifts to it briefly, and they both laugh, just a little. The waves break rhythmically at their feet, cool foam brushing against their toes. The sound is hypnotic, grounding them, making their voices lower, calmer. Oddly, nature seems to mediate the argument, providing a steady, patient counterpoint to human volatility. Even the gulls overhead circle lazily, indifferent observers to the drama unfolding below. Nearby, a sandcastle has been rebuilt more sturdily by local children. The couple pauses, noticing the new towers and smoother walls. The monkey vlogger crouches, mimicking the children's careful hands, patting down sand and laughing quietly. The woman watches, shaking her head, the corners of her mouth lifting into a reluctant smile. Small shared moments like this help stitch together the frayed edges of their emotions. As they walk further along the beach, the police patrol that had approached earlier now observes from a distance, giving space but remaining watchful. Their presence subtly reinforces boundaries, ensuring the argument doesn't escalate further. Scholars still debate whether the awareness of being watched affects emotional regulation in public, and here, it seems to allow a fragile reconciliation to unfold safely. The monkey vlogger finally speaks again, more carefully. He says, voice steady, "I'll make it up to you. We'll explore Goa the way we planned. No surprises, no delays. Promise." She pauses, studying him. "I want to believe you, but I need to see that it actually happens." The dynamic has shifted from confrontation to negotiation, a delicate but crucial step toward repair. Oddly, the tide seems to participate, washing away their footprints as they talk, symbolic in its quiet impartiality. Each step forward, each word becomes a fresh start, unburdened by traces of prior missteps. Even the environment seems to encourage patience, teaching them the slow rhythm of reconciliation. They stop to pick up a small piece of driftwood, laughing as they pass it back and forth, teasing one another lightly.
The air filled with the sound of gentle waves, the smell of coconut and salt, and occasional distant laughter from children playing softens the mood. Humor, even small and awkward, begins to repair the emotional fissures created earlier. The monkey vlogger gestures toward the horizon, where the sun glints off distant boats. He says, "Let's plan together, so nothing goes wrong this time." She nods slowly, a glimmer of trust returning. The rhythm of shared intention replaces the rhythm of waves for a moment, as the couple begins to rebuild their honeymoon experience collaboratively. Nearby, a stray dog curls up in the sand, watching silently. Its stillness mirrors the calm that is settling over the couple, a quiet presence emphasizing patience and observation over hasty action. Scholars still debate whether environmental stillness can aid emotional recovery, and here, it feels undeniably effective. As the sun lowers, casting orange and pink across the sky, the couple walks hand in hand for the first time since the argument began. The gesture is small but profound, a visible acknowledgement of care, compromise, and the desire to continue together despite recent tension. You notice how subtle shifts in posture and proximity carry the weight of unspoken understanding. Finally, they pause, looking out over the water. The waves lap gently at their feet, the tide smoothing sand and footprints alike. The argument has transformed into quiet conversation, plans for the immediate future, and shared laughter. Oddly, the ocean, indifferent and eternal, provides a reassuring continuity, a reminder that life flows on even after conflict. The evening settles over the beach, warm light fading into dusky pinks and purples. You watch as the couple, now walking more calmly, trace their steps along the shore. Their argument has subsided, replaced by careful dialogue and tentative smiles. The tension still lingers, but it has softened, like a bruise fading in the sun. "You know," the woman says, glancing at him, "I still feel a little hurt, but I can see you're trying." Her voice is quiet, patient, but firm. The monkey vlogger nods, his expression earnest. "I promise," he says. "I'll make sure nothing like this happens again. I'll plan with you, step by step." His voice is sincere, carrying the weight of intention. A quirky detail catches your eye. A coconut tumbles near their feet, nudged by the gentle tide. The monkey vlogger picks it up, holding it out as if offering a truce. She laughs softly, shaking her head, a light moment amid residual tension. Scholars still debate whether small, shared acts of humor during conflict facilitate reconciliation, but here, it seems to help restore balance. The waves continue their constant rhythm, foaming at their toes, indifferent to human emotion, but providing a meditative cadence. The couple begins to match that rhythm with each careful step and word. Oddly, the natural world's constancy offers them perspective, a grounding force that frames the argument within a larger, patient context. Nearby, children build sandcastles with meticulous care, repairing sections previously washed away by the tide. The monkey vlogger crouches briefly, smoothing a corner, his actions playful, his intent to reconnect visible. The woman watches, a faint smile appearing. Humor and collaborative engagement are slowly knitting their connection back together. A stray dog curls nearby, observing silently. Its relaxed posture is a subtle reminder of stillness and patience, reflecting the emotional shift between the couple. Scholars still argue about the role of environmental cues in human emotional regulation, and here, the dog's presence seems unconsciously comforting. As they walk further along the shore, the couple begins discussing practical steps for their honeymoon plans. "Tomorrow, we'll start early, but we'll go at our pace," he says. She nods, voice softer, and we'll agree on stops together. The dialogue is no longer about frustration, but about collaboration, mutual understanding, and shared responsibility. The tide rises gradually, washing away footprints. Each step becomes symbolic. Traces of past conflict smoothed over, leaving room for new patterns. The couple's gestures, laughter, and soft words demonstrate an emotional reset, a subtle but meaningful reconciliation. Oddly, the beach itself seems to participate, lending structure and patience to human emotions. You notice small details. A feather floats in the shallow surf. A crab scuttles along the sand. Distant gulls circle lazily above. Each natural element, indifferent yet present, provides context and rhythm for the couple's tentative reconciliation. Their focus shifts from past mistakes to future plans, influenced subtly by the world around them. Nearby, a lantern is lit at a small beachside hut, casting soft amber light across the sand. Shadows dance gently, reflecting off the water. The monkey vlogger pauses to watch, taking a slow breath, letting the calmness of the scene soak in. The woman, noticing his pause, offers her hand. Small gestures like this reinforce trust and presence, critical in rebuilding emotional connection. Scholars still debate whether environmental consistency, waves, light, sound, directly aids emotional repair, or if it merely frames human interactions. Standing here, observing the couple, it seems clear both hold truth. Nature's constancy offers perspective, but human willingness, humor, and attention create the bridge between conflict and reconciliation. Finally, as the sun dips below the horizon, the couple sits on a low dune, sand cooling beneath them. They watch the water together, silent for a few moments, breathing in rhythm with the tide. Words are no longer necessary. Presence and attention suffice. Oddly, the sound of waves feels like a gentle applause, a celebration of human resilience in both love and adaptation. By the time night falls, the police patrol has moved on, the beach empty, except for the couple and a few distant figures. The monkey vlogger wraps an arm around his wife, tentative but real. The argument has concluded not with victory or defeat, but with understanding, patience, and mutual intention. The ocean whispers softly in the background, a lullaby for hearts settling after turbulence. Night has fully descended over the beach, the sky a deep indigo scattered with stars. You watch the couples sitting side by side on the sand, the last traces of tension softened into quiet reflection. The air carries the mingling scent of salt, coconut husks, and distant fires, comforting in its familiarity. The monkey vlogger adjusts his raglan t-shirt slightly, glancing at his wife. "I'm glad we talked it out," he says softly, voice low to match the rhythm of the waves. She leans into him, letting her shoulder brush against his. "Me too," she murmurs, a subtle warmth returning to her tone. The moment feels delicate, tender, a fragile bridge rebuilt between them. A quirky detail catches your attention. A small crab crawls over a driftwood log nearby, its tiny movements oddly synchronized with the gentle lapping of waves. Scholars still debate whether such minor environmental observations influence human emotional perception, yet here it seems to provide a subtle grounding, an unconscious cue toward calm and patience. The couple sits in silence for a while, each taking in the night, the vast, indifferent ocean, the starlit sky, the distant glow of lanterns along the shore. Oddly, it's in the quiet that their reconciliation feels most real. Words have served their purpose. Now presence and shared observation carry the emotional weight. Nearby, a dog snores softly in the sand, and a gull rests on a low rock, wings tucked, observing the scene. Nature's constancy frames the human experience, offering both perspective and tranquility. The monkey vlogger reaches for a small shell, turning it over in his hand before placing it gently beside his wife, a tiny symbolic gesture of peace and renewed connection. She smiles faintly, brushing sand from her hands. The tension of earlier disagreements has faded into awareness, a lesson in communication, patience, and shared intention. Oddly, the simple act of being together, observing and listening, feels like the most profound resolution of all. Scholars still argue whether emotional reconciliation relies more on verbal exchange or shared experiences, and here it seems to be both, intertwined seamlessly. The waves continue their rhythmic whisper, a lullaby that soothes both heart and mind. The couple traces lines in the sand with their fingers, playful at first, then quietly collaborative, building tiny castles and patterns. These minor acts are absurd in scale, yet monumental in their impact, bridging the gap between conflict and harmony. As the night deepens, the lanterns along the beach flicker softly, casting long shadows that merge with the darkness. The couple lies back, heads nearly touching, gazing at the stars. Their breathing falls into a shared cadence, relaxed, steady. The ocean hums, the sand cools beneath them, and the world outside seems paused, offering a moment of complete presence. Oddly, the scene feels cinematic in its simplicity. The couple, the gentle waves, the faint glow of lanterns, and the distant call of night birds. It is a tableau of emotional resolution, quiet learning, and human connection. You notice the small details, the way his arm wraps tentatively around her, the way she rests her head lightly against his, the shared laughter at a tiny shell or stray crab that convey reconciliation more powerfully than words alone. A faint breeze stirs, carrying the soft scent of the sea and distant flowers. It brushes over their faces, gentle and persistent. The monkey vlogger whispers softly, "Thank you for staying patient with me." She responds in equal quietude, "Thank you for listening." The simplicity of their exchange underscores the journey they've traveled, from conflict and misunderstanding to understanding and renewed intimacy. The night grows deeper, stars twinkling like scattered diamonds above the inky horizon. Waves lap rhythmically, the same as they have for centuries, indifferent yet soothing. The couple's presence in this timeless scene is ephemeral, yet their emotions, their reconciliation, are profoundly human and immediate. Oddly, the contrast between the eternal and the fleeting magnifies the significance of each tender gesture or each shared glance. Finally, the couple lies back fully, hands intertwined, gazing upward. The ocean hums its lullaby. The night carries a sense of calm, and all residual tension dissolves into quiet understanding. Oddly, the simplest moments, touch, breath, and shared silence become the most monumental, the foundation upon which trust, patience, and love are rebuilt. The scene closes on the two of them side by side, anchored in presence, connection, and the soothing rhythm of nature. Even after conflict, life, like the tide, continues patiently, offering opportunities for repair, reflection, and intimacy. The night is gentle, the beach calm, and the couple, having navigated their storm, is finally at ease. The night stretches on, soft and unhurried. You listen to the gentle rhythm of the waves, the lull of the sea brushing sand along the shore. Stars flicker faintly above, distant yet constant, a silent reminder that the world continues, patient and persistent. Breathe slowly. Inhale the salt-tinged air. Let it fill your lungs. Let it remind you of the calm after turmoil. The gentle hum of the ocean carries away the day's tension, smoothing footprints in the sand and symbolically in your mind. Tiny details catch your attention. A crab weaving across the sand, a lantern flickering softly in the distance, a stray dog curled against the dunes. These moments, small and easily overlooked, carry a quiet reassurance. Life continues, fragile yet resilient, and you are a part of its subtle rhythm. Feel the cool breeze brush your face, the warmth of sand or earth beneath you, the faint chorus of nocturnal life, all of it converging to cradle your senses. Oddly, the impermanence of each moment is comforting, a reminder that tension, like footprints, will fade and calm will remain. Let your thoughts drift with the waves, gentle and unhurried. Picture the couple on the beach, reconciled, finding presence and connection. Let that calmness ripple through your own mind. Each exhale releases lingering strain. Each inhale draws in the soft night air, anchoring you to the here and now. Close your eyes if you wish, imagining the